Hello, everyone. So we have a bit of a conundrum here. There are two roughly 40-minute long videos to cover, and historically I take a preposterous amount of time to get through videos, because I will critique them endlessly and I'll stop it constantly, and I have no intention of stopping that anytime soon. So here's my reasoning process. We can go straight into the reply to Jordan Peterson by Carefree Wandering recently, which I haven't seen yet. Which is entitled, as you can see here, Reply to Jordan Peterson, Individualism, Wokeism, and Civil Religion. I have seen bits of this first video on wokeism, also by Carefree Wandering, to which I believe Peterson is responding in the second video, and I had some serious issues with it. I don't have it out for Carefree Wandering, but I find he has a tendency to, under the auspices of being a philosophy channel, he will weigh into areas that are well outside of his competence, and he's not entirely upfront about what he is actually competent to speak on. And this was a big example of that. In particular, his trying to characterize wokeism as a wing of a civil religion or an American civil religion was such that it robbed that term, if indeed it has any actual content or concrete content. It robbed that term of any concrete content. So, we can go through this one. I've largely forgotten the contents of this. This is from back in June. Or we can just go straight into the Jordan Peterson one. And that's my inclination, because I expect, or at least I expect that he should, at some point through this, sort of recapitulate his arguments in the wokeism video. And I think that's what we're going to do. So, I never realized this, but he kind of looks like Baron Harkonnen from the Lynch movie, doesn't he? Sorry, CF. What is a religion? That is an excellent question. Hey, by the way, pop quiz. Who originated the term civil religion? It's actually very apropos. Someone I've been focusing on a lot recently on this channel. It's Rousseau. In the last chapter of The Social Contract, Rousseau gives... Actually, this will be... maybe this is a good thing to start off on before we head into it, because we'll clarify some things for later. In the last chapter, prior to the little tiny conclusion of Rousseau's The Social Contract, he talks about religion and its relationship to politics. And he outlines three kinds of religion. The religion of man, which is sort of this idea of a kind of religion of your actual relationship to the beyond or the world or to God or whatever is actually there, quite apart from institutions, creeds, temples, etc. How every individual human being relates to underlying reality, as the distributists might put it. The second one is civil religion, and that is a religion which joins the highest good to the state, gives the laws its force, and turns what people used to call the magistrates and the prince and the laws and whatnot into the articles and dogmas of religion, and turns people into good citizens. And there's a third kind that he has no respect for, and that's the religion of the priest. And he has some rather prejudiced examples. One prejudiced example, I would say, in the case of Japan, but also the Roman Church. Is it the Roman Church? I think it was the Roman Church. Because the issue with that was it divided sovereignty between the church and the prince. And that creates... That sort of creates an intrinsic conflict within each citizen, because they now have two goods in contest with each other that they have to fulfill each. They have to be good citizens, but they also have to be upright with respect to the church. And it's like, what do we do? So, as institutions, or as an institutional state of affairs, shall we say, it's worthless on Rousseau's reading. Yeah, sorry. So the examples are the religion of the lamas and that of the Japanese. This is for the religion of the priest. And Roman Christianity, yes. And he characterizes it. It results in a sort of mixed and unsociable rite that has no name. And he has no care about that one. He's concerned with the religion of man and the religion of the citizen, or civil religion. And crucially, a civil religion is not just a description of ideas and notions or dogmas held by the populace that have sort of a woo-woo nature to them. That's sort of the way Carefree Wandering characterizes civil religion, and it's a meaningless way to use the term, because you can describe anything that way. And furthermore, there's nothing inherently civil about it, except that it happens to be widespread or widely visible within what is characterized as a political community. But it doesn't bear on the legitimacy of the laws. It doesn't alter the conduct of citizens towards the state. It doesn't compel loyalty. It's not the basis of community. Like, it's not civil. It's, even if we leave aside the fact that it is clearly not religion, it's not civil. So I really dislike his use of the term civil religion to describe quote unquote wokeism, as much as I dislike him even countenancing that term wokeism in the first place. And he does sort of a very amateurish kind of anthropology where, and a lot of people do this. I've been rereading Stalin's On the National Question recently, and Stalin does this with respect to nationalism or the nation, on the section "What is a Nation?" And that is to try and understand, or to try and clarify the true significance of terms that are salient in political discussion by simply assuming that they must refer to something true, and then just working between picking and choosing different uses of these terms to find the one that is the most internally coherent. The problem is that this relies on the assumption that the framing itself that even allows these terms to come into being isn't itself entirely inaccurate, because it may be the fact that even if you can derive a coherent way of sort of construing these different terms in the abstract, that they nonetheless bear on nothing in reality, that the discourse is actually completely removed from what's actually taking place. So, by the way, don't you think the notion of sovereign as being one single entity is practically wrong? No, I think it's like it's an analytic category. It may be the case that nothing bears, that no rational agent bears sovereignty. That's a possibility. But it can't be wrong. It's like, don't you think the notion of God is wrong? It's like, no, it's just a name with qualities attached to it. So, it may be that no such thing exists, or nothing bears that name, or nothing appropriately bears that name. But that's neither here nor there with respect to the category. Like, is the idea of a unicorn wrong? No. The idea that there are unicorns is wrong, but the idea of a unicorn isn't wrong. What about the current phenomena of evangelical Christianity feeding into fascist sympathies? Which of the three would that fall into? Religion of the priest? That's an interesting question. In a way, it may actually be, because there is a way in which a civil religion can be defective. So, I think on the one hand you could construe it as the religion of the priest, in which a religious body tries to take for itself the right to frame laws or to control certain essential civil functions. Like, for example, marriage. That's the example Rousseau gives. If a religious body that is not one with the state can now control marriages, and this actually bears specifically on the American case, because, of course, evangelicals and other religious groups have been very, very vocal, and a lot of money and some a lot has been spent on determining who is allowed to marry within the state, or what that means. If that is controlled, that includes things like inheritances and all sorts of other runoff things. And the general idea here is, if a religious body that is apart from the state is able to control civic functions that have or able to control functions that have runoff civic effects that are outside of the purview of the sovereign, which of course is the instantiation of the general will, then the sovereign is no longer sovereign in fact, because the form of the state and its contents is no longer determined by the reasoning of every citizen. The laws are no longer authored by themselves. There is an extrinsic element, even if it's materially within its borders, that is feeding into its form and is changing things without its input. So, like, would that be an example of civil religion, though, specifically? I think it needs to be some kind of institution in the first place. It seems more like a mass movement of some kind that's more like atomized. Although it's definitely something that should be, or it's something that can have those effects, and has had those effects, to be sure. Moeller, I am assuming that's the name of Carefree Wandering. Moeller has also made it clear that his philosophical field of expertise is Taoism. I'm not sure why you would specify that that's a philosophical field of expertise. That seems like... Because philosophy... I wouldn't doubt that philosophy, in sort of a general sense, like, fed into the emergence of Taoism. Like, there was definitely something akin to philosophical thought. I mean like identical with philosophical thought. In sort of in a loose sense. But philosophy itself also bears, like, it has its own cultural and political history. One that we've largely removed ourselves from. Not entirely, like, we can still do philosophy, of course. Like, I'm not going to say that philosophy is, like, tied to ancient Greece or something. But, like, the term itself and the relation that is even implicit in the name, the distinction between a sophist and a philosopher, for example, the distinction introduced by Plato, that has cultural baggage. That's not simply a universal distinction. So, I think by civil they mean something that relates to relation without the civil society. Then why call it civil? That seems entirely unintuitive. Speculation, but Moeller likely isn't using the definition of civil religion Rousseau coined. I'm not suggesting that he's using civil religion as Rousseau coined it. The critique I'm levying here is that he doesn't use it in a way that it actually implies anything civil, except for the bare fact that it appears to be predominant. Again, we're taking for granted that it's a religion, and I deny that categorically, that it's predominant among a community of people that can be described as a citizenry. And it's not ubiquitous, so it's a little bit baffling. And since he characterizes it as a wing, and characterizes roughly everything else in between that, and I think whatever he characterizes what Jordan Peterson is doing as constituting the faces of a whole, the faces of the civil religion that encompasses all of us, it means absolutely nothing. He's just saying the stuff people think in this geographic region. It's like, okay, but why are we calling it religion, and why are we calling it a civil religion? Like, these terms have to mean something, right? Otherwise, it's just an elevator word. Like, to call it a civil religion, if civil religion doesn't mean something definite and concrete in the world, it's definitionally a meaningless thing to do. Yeah. Quote, focus on Chinese and comparative philosophy. I don't like comparative philosophy either for the same reason, because there was a book, actually I have it right here, a very bad book, and I didn't want it to be a bad book, because I have no ill disposition towards the author. But we read this in an indigenous philosophy or an indigenous politics course, and it's called "This Is Not a Peace Pipe" by Dale Turner towards a critical indigenous philosophy. This is one of the few times I'm showing you a book that I don't necessarily recommend. He is arguing, speaking specifically to young indigenous scholars, so he's not talking to me, that for the sake of the resurgence of indigenous culture against colonially imposed philosophical frames, indigenous storytelling should be posited as indigenous philosophy, as akin and as a competing force to, for example, the philosophical tradition coming out from Plato onwards. And I'm being extremely broad here. I'm talking about Islamic philosophers, I'm talking about German philosophers, like everybody. The problem with that is that philosophy was originally, again, a distinction introduced by Plato against sophists and also against poets. Now, Socrates was considered to be a sophist because sophists simply meant it had a neutral setting. They were, of course, viewed with suspicion because they taught rich people how to be very persuasive in the assembly, and that of course, is deeply unfair. But they were viewed neutrally, outside of, again, their influence on politics. Plato introduces the distinction of a philosopher, one who loves wisdom or loves truth or what have you. Injecting a distinctiveness into the philosopher, distinguishing the philosopher by making that person in a specific relationship to the truth, whereas the sophist is simply a purveyor, a provider of wisdom. That distinction only makes sense in that context, initially. Like, we've inherited it, but it's a meaningless distinction in a world that doesn't recognize a distinction between sophists and poets, say. Indigenous stories, it's unclear what they are. Certainly there was philosophy that went to their framing. Certainly there were purveyors of wisdom that, and you could, for example, characterize, and I mean this in a non-derogatory way, storytellers as being sophists in the same sense as, like, Aristophanes characterized Socrates as being a sophist in the Clouds. You can also characterize them as poets. Like, there's obviously elements of poetry in them. There's stuff in there that's akin to what you would read in somebody like, Hesiod or Sophocles, right? Now, if you call that all philosophy, what happens? That's just indigenous. What happens? Or if you put that into a list and say, like, this is one philosophy among others, and these are its distinctive features. Well, insofar as there were potentially sophists and poets and all these other things, and maybe categories of thinkers and speakers that we have no memory of, or simply no knowledge of, at least I have no knowledge of them. By calling it philosophy, you bury that distinctiveness, and you don't facilitate a resurgence of indigenous culture. You facilitate a replacement of indigenous culture. And maybe that's unavoidable, because maybe, like, it's just outside of the realm of human knowledge to accurately recreate these things. But I feel like you shouldn't accelerate that loss, right? And it's the same thing with comparative politics. It assumes that the political is a ubiquitous universal category. But it's not. It refers originally to a very peculiar kind of community, and ancient Greeks recognized this. And not only that, but prior to the ancient Greeks, and there's still, like, semblance or remnants of this in the writings of early Greek philosophers, like Plato, for example, talks about, if memory serves. It's been a little while since I read the Laws, but I believe I remember he talks about how the first societies were, like, falling from a flood. People started to assemble on hills, like the Acropolis, literally, the polis on the height, the fortress on the height. Long story short, the political refers to a specific relationship to a specific kind of cultural artifact, to a polis, to a fortress. Not every community lived in polises. Not every community developed an identity surrounding the polis. There's a whole book on this, which is now buried behind a squiddle. One moment. Stay. Greek Discovery of Politics. Very important book that nobody has read. I highly recommend it if you can find it. You can find it on LibGen currently. Hard copies are hard to find. Or you could just read the Constitution of Athens. But you get the point. So I don't like comparative philosophy because it turns things that are not philosophy into philosophy. And I don't say that like there are a lot of people who are like cultural chauvinists who are like, no, that's not real philosophy. We can't. Why are we elevating like Taoism and all that primitive stuff? Like, no, it's actually super advanced and not primitive at all and extremely valuable. But if you change it into something that's not, then you lose it, right? Because now you're attaching stuff to it that isn't of it, and you lose the ability to develop it on its own terms. And it can bear philosophically. You can absolutely do philosophy based on the Tao Te Ching or on any number of these things. And there's definitely philosophy that went into their framing. Like, these are incredibly valuable and rare products of extreme human ingenuity and genius. I don't know if those are the same thing. But if you then say, oh, well, this is just Plato done a different way, which is effectively what that's doing, then you've lost it. You're not talking about the Tao Te Ching anymore. You're talking about, I don't know, some construal of quote-unquote Western philosophy, a term I also hate, with like a kind of exotic cultural glazing. It's not good. No, Carefree philosophy is not dumb, sort of. Just stop with that. Stop with that dumbness. I don't see how it's not philosophy. I guess perhaps the use of language not being European. No, it's not philosophy because it's its own category of thing. Like, okay, here's an assumption, and I notice that I get a lot of pushback when I talk about this, because people assume that if it's not philosophy, therefore it's something less. Philosophy is not the highest human activity. It may be that it's something else that philosophy doesn't do. Right? So... All right, I've been rambling for long enough. Let's get into this.
Thank you very much, Dr. Peterson, for responding to the video that we did on you and that characterized you as a mirror of wokeism. In this video, I pointed out that today's society's character...
Oh, there's comments there. Hang on, let's look at those comments quickly. Where are they? Oh, did he delete them? Did Peterson delete them? What the hell? He must have. Wait, those were under the wokeism video, right? Jordan Peterson, the mirror of wokeism. I see. Okay, let's find that one quickly. I just want to read those comments before we get into it. Here we go. Here, let me know if that's cut off. It shouldn't be cut off. It should be visible. Okay, I am afraid you claim I believe has virtually nothing to do with what I actually think. Furthermore, your critique is chock full of intellectual tricks. I never said the rational quote-unquote ego of individuals is somehow in charge and can or should direct complex systems. You have oversimplified my thought, not least by strawmanning it. God, the drugs really did a number on him, didn't they? Like, this is borderline incoherent. Speaking about my quote-unquote role as if what I am doing is a Baudrillard-esque spectacle designed by myself or others for some reason that lurks behind the scenes, and highlighting my anger as, for example, opposed to jovial, and therefore kind and positive Slavoj Žižek, who I actually like. What? Oh, I see. You put the brackets in the wrong spot. So as opposed to jovial and therefore kind and positive, bracket, Slavoj Žižek, who I actually like, comma, while ignoring the many discussions I have had with some of the world's finest comedians. What the... the bulk of what you were saying is not criticism, but innuendo. Finally, in totality, you do all but state that I somehow have a simpler and more dated and anachronistic view of the mind and the complex world it inhabits than you and those, say, sociologists who share your presumptions. Good luck with that. Wow. Benzos are dangerous drugs, kids. Don't... You be very careful if you get prescribed them. They will mess you up.
On you, and that characterized you as a mirror of wokeism. In this video, I pointed out that today's society is characterized by a conflict between two opposite wings of the same civil religion. One wing is wokeism, the other wing is represented by you. But you weren't happy with this, and you asked me a question. So I'm going to try to answer the question now. Jordan Peterson complained about a number of things in the video we did. And number one, he said that I misunderstood or oversimplified his thought, and especially regarding his core idea of the sovereign individual. And then secondly, he was unhappy that I unduly highlighted his anger. And thirdly, he thought I was strawmanning him as doing self-help and depicting this genre somewhat negatively. Then he didn't like that I was framing him, to quote him, as if what I am doing is a Baudrillardesque spectacle. On top of that, he also found that I depreciated his take on Nietzsche as out.
And you do something similar in your closing remarks on Nietzsche, implying that my quote-unquote dated and interpretations of thought are a bit superseded by real scholars, who, surprise, surprise, come to the same conclusions about him as you. No, Jordan Peterson is just a profoundly sloppy thinker. Okay, here's something that's been on my mind for a little while. Not, like, on my mind constantly, but I might do a video on this sometime, which is going to be super low effort because I don't need to think that much about it. But Jordan Peterson is really good at pretending to think. He does zero research or preparation prior to an engagement, but he spends every single engagement doing a lot of this. And people watching think that, look, he's so thoughtful. He's actually taking time to think about what's being said to him. It's like, no, he's not taking any time to do so. And he's pretending to do so at the last minute. Like the student who has 5 minutes before a test and they suddenly have to start cramming, like, oh fuck, oh shit, what's the answer? Like it's all posturing. I wouldn't deny for a second that he's read Nietzsche. I wouldn't deny for a second that he's read a few novels by Dostoevsky. I sincerely doubt he reads a whole lot else. I don't know. It's just like, especially now, like when we covered that brief clip of him talking to Steven Pinker, like he is not well. He really went downhill the last little while.
Dated and unscholarly. Then he asked a question. He said,
is the video too loud? God, every single time I do this, you complain about the volume. First it's the video is too quiet, now the video is too loud. Okay, I'm turning it down.
It seems that you are saying, me, all we offer to the world is something akin to an approval-seeking set of false selves with nothing genuine at the bottom. I ask you in all seriousness, is that a philosophy or is it a confession? Now, I want to address all of these points, working up to answering the question. And while I'm doing this, I hope I will be able to clear up some
Oh, shit. I was looking at the audio. I missed the question. I ask you in all seriousness, is that a philosophy or is it a confession? And worst of all, you claim as realistic in contradistinction to my naivety that your conclusion that all we offer to the world is something akin to an approval-seeking set of false selves with nothing genuine at the bottom. I ask you in all seriousness, is that a philosophy or is it a confession? I don't know what that means. I guess so. By a confession, I don't know if he means like a confession in the sense of like my first read of it is that like a religious creed? Is that like the Apostles' Creed? Are you just like a religious fundamentalist but woke? Or does he mean you are projecting when you characterize my positions in this way? Maybe this actually describes yours. I don't know. It's hard to tell.
In all seriousness, is that a philosophy or is it a confession? Now, I want to address all of these points, working up to answering the question. And while I'm doing this, I hope I will be able to clear up some misunderstandings. And I'd like to highlight right away that my point, of course, is not only to answer his question, but to better understand Jordan Peterson as a, or perhaps even the, major public intellectual or even spiritual figure of today. So it's not just about understanding him and not primarily about understanding him as a person, but about saying something about our society in general. And as always, the point is to be critical, but not to be judgmental. Let me start with a correction and an apology. Jordan Peterson pointed out rightly that I somewhat misrepresented his thought by saying that it is built on an idea of individual rationality. That is not precise. What he says instead of rationality is something different, namely he uses the term logos. So let's hear what Jordan Peterson actually has to say, and we'll listen to a few videos and then try to summarize what he actually says in 4 simple steps.
I hate when right-wingers use the word logos. It's like it's such a woo-woo word. Like there's logos literally just is a kind of speech. That's literally all it is. It's opposed to mythos. Mythos is like poetic speech, the speech of heroes accustomed to prevail, right? Logos is like a new translation by Robin Waterfield. That is logos. Logos is the grocery store is up yonder by the bay or something like that. Whereas mythos is there are no binding pacts between lions and men. That's mythos. Kinds of speech. All it means. When we talk about logic, it's codified speech of the former kind.
So we'll go step by step. Let's look at these short clips here.
I'm helping them find words to express things that they already knew to be true. And those things that they know to be true are the bedrock axioms of our culture. And one of the things we got right in the West was the idea of the sovereign, responsible individual. And so I think that there isn't anything more meaningful or real than the idea of individual sovereignty. Then our cultural and legal systems wrapped themselves tightly around that ultimately unlikely narrative of individual sovereignty and made it their central, unshakable pillar.
In these clips that we just listened to, Peterson says 3 things. They're all about the sovereign individual. Number 1, that it is a bedrock axiom of our culture, that it's its central, unshakable pillar, and that it is the most meaningful and real idea that our culture is built on.
There is no idea in political philosophy that makes the individual sovereign. Sovereign power has to do with the absolute decision over a space. Individuals don't have that. In fact, individuals don't even occupy or own a single space all the time. Individual subjects or citizens don't even really, in actuality, own even their own like private households. Like there is a sense of autonomy, literally autonomy, a law unto oneself in ancient Greece, which is the idea that within one's house, the patriarch is the master and can conduct things as he wants. And of course, like you have everything like household slaves, the cult, etc. The patriarch has power over life and death of everybody in his family. Which is, again, one of the reasons why democracy is not actually a super nice and cozy political form necessarily. But moving on from that, the idea of a sovereign individual, sovereign is individual, but the it's not the individual human being. It's the person of the sovereign state that is the sovereign individual. Like this is just flat out wrong. Now we do see with Hobbes and onwards, and John Locke and Rousseau and like that whole tradition, the one that is being talked about here, this idea that political legitimacy and community and all these things are emergent from individual interest or individual attitudes or relations. It's a social contract after all. But that doesn't make the individual sovereign. This is an account of sovereignty, but it's not sovereignty of the individual. It's sovereignty of, well, sovereignty of the state, which is also borne by the person of the state, which is not necessarily an individual human being. Jordan Peterson changes logo into Bolokos. What? Oh, you're joking. Okay.
As a second step, let's look at the next short clip.
That we are simultaneously accepting the proposition that every singular one of us is a divine center of logos.
Here, he says that along with this most meaningful and real idea of the sovereign individual, we are also simultaneously accepting the proposition that every singular one of us is a divine center of logos. Now, following this,
Slowly starting to realize this John Locke of which you speak is not related to the BBC show. What's the name he goes? Yeah, he goes under in Lost. Jeremy Bentham. He goes as Bentham later on. Yeah.
let's look at this clip here.
A divine center of the eternal word that brings habitable order into being through the voluntary, truthful confrontation with chaos and the unknown.
So what he's saying here is that as such divine centers of logos, we basically actually follow God's work when he created the world, and, quoting him again, in this way we bring habitable order into being through the voluntary, truthful confrontation with chaos and the unknown. So this means that the task of the individual is, in his or her own personal realm, to take on responsibility, what I used to call to man up, and then transform chaos into order through the divine logos in which he or she somehow partakes individually. Now, this brings us to the fourth step, and again, let's look at some clips.
What I'd like to concentrate on very briefly is the part that makes the Declaration of Independence self-evident, and that is that man and woman alike are made in the image of God. It's also not clear what being made in the image of God would mean, given that by that point in the book you don't know much about God, except that you do know that he uses logos to extract order out of chaos. That's about all you know, and that's good. And so
Okay. He doesn't, though, because logos is Greek. And what is the I don't know the Hebrew, but it's like I'm probably mistaken. I heard like I remember hearing somebody read it. Bereshit means formless, or roughly translates to formless. What was the bara? I don't know. But there's like, it's not logos. That's Greek. That is a Greek translation of the term, and it's a very loose one.
proposition there, as far as I'm concerned, is that that's what human beings do. That's what we do.
Peterson's main problem is assuming Christianity is correct. It's actually weirder than that. Peterson's main problem here is assuming that Christianity is universal, which it's not. Like, think about it. He's we're not even like specifically like. In the beginning was the Word, John 3:16. Everybody in Sunday school knows this. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word is with God. The word "word" is a translation of logos into English. That is not the term that an ancient Hebrew would know. That's because that text is Greek. and heavily influenced by Greek philosophy as well. Like, the Old Testament is a really alien text. Like, it's weird. We don't even have the ability to think in those terms anymore, or at least we don't have the ability to know what thinking in those terms would necessarily be like. He's using the word logos because it sounds good.
And that this is way more important than people think.
Yes, Gabriel,
that we are
that verse. Sorry, not John 3:16. John 3:16 is for God so loved the world. This is John 1:1.
Co-creators of reality. We actually believe this politically because our Western systems, which are quite functional, are also
which are hegemonic. That's distinct from functional.
Predicated on the idea that you're sovereign.
No.
And you could keep the
No, God damn it. They're predicated on the idea that they're not even predicated on this idea, because they're predicated on things that aren't necessarily laid bare theoretically. The liberal state in principle is operating under the assumption that the state is constituted of its citizens, or of the will of its citizens. In practice, that's not the case. But that doesn't make the individual sovereign. That makes the individual a part of the sovereign, which is radically different. Even in Hobbes, even in Locke, like this is... Like Hobbes less so, but they defend the autonomy of the individual with respect to things over which the magistrate is not competent. So your relationship to God or to higher reality or whatever you want, that's not a thing that government can competently deal with for you. And so you don't contract with government concerning those things. And therefore it's not the princes or the sovereigns or the dictator or whatever. It's not their business what you think with respect to those things. That is not sovereignty. It's not sovereignty in a meaningful sense.
The ship of state properly afloat and oriented in the correct direction. And our entire society is predicated on that idea as well. And so that's the responsibility.
Now, importantly, Peterson is very clear here that this kind of program also is a political project, and that it has already manifested itself within what he calls Western civilization, particularly in the United States and in the Declaration of Independence, which is, of course, a very foundational document for this political project. So, in this way, Peterson's personal man-up philosophy is at the same time also at the foundation of a political ideology. I think it's fair enough to summarize the whole idea in the following proposition. Civilized Western society is founded on the most real idea of sovereign individuals.
This is redundant, by the way. As soon as you have a society, it's civilized by definition.
As divine centers of logos, whose mission is, by individually repeating God's act of transforming chaos into order in their own lives, to take on responsibility of political leadership in the world.
If Carefree Wandering doesn't interrogate this term divine centers of logos, if he just accepts that, then he's doing exactly what Peterson is doing. I like him. I think he's a well-meaning guy. I don't think he's as arrogant and narcissistic as Peterson is. And by the way, for anyone who thinks that I'm one of these people with Peterson derangement syndrome or something, I like Jordan Peterson. I like him, unfortunately, in the same way I like Hawes. I think he's sincere. I just think he's he's out to lunch. But if he's accepting these terms without criticizing them, then he's doing the same thing in a more way that's kosher to me, maybe, but I mean in the sense that it's probably less harmful It is objectively less harmful, I would say. Not objectively, it's always subjective, but you know what I mean. But he's still playing fast and loose with these terms. He's allowing like these elevator words to just carry the argument forward up to the sky, and they just don't stand up to actual scrutiny. Because this is in the realm of political philosophy and political history. So is philosophy, to be clear. Political science is, unfortunately, the architectonic science. It does supersede philosophy. But that's beside the point. Yeah, I guess we'll see.
Now, the main point that I want to make is that the genre of this very message is civil.
Brief correction on the logos thing. John 1:1 is in the New Testament, originally written in Greek. I said that it was. I said John 3:16 erroneously originally, because that's the one they hammer into your head when you're in Sparks as a kid. Not the girls only Sparks. There was like a thing called Awana. I don't know if that was only in Canada. But you had to like memorize Bible verses, and you put like little jewels into like a plastic badge thing. It was really cool, actually. You know what? I have a lot of issues with Christian apologists and all that sort of stuff. And I have a lot of issues with a lot of stuff that is taught in Sunday school about like gender relations and things like that, especially as churches become more like politically deranged, as that becomes like, as corrections to a lot of their noxious practices becomes like part of the public discourse. But it's also at the same time one of the last remaining places where somebody prior to college, without like parents who already have a respect for this kind of thing, can get something akin to a classical education. Like, I actually read the Bible, like, and a lot of people do, of course, but think about it this way. I actually got the opportunity as a very, very lower class kid to read ancient literature in depth over a long period of time. Now, I was lucky in that I, through a series of fortuitous accidents, was conditioned to be extremely interested in particular kinds of things about it, such that I actually learned about it in an interesting way, and learned to love learning, etc., etc. But, you know, there's something to be said for that. I owe a lot to it. Despite my serious issues with it, I can't 100% diss it, because I wouldn't be here without it. So it's like, life is strange.
Religion. Notions like divine center of logos and claims about unshakable pillars of Western civilization are not, precisely speaking, psychological or sociological claims in an academic sense. They're not meant to be empirically proven.
Sorry, I need to rewind like 5 seconds. I didn't catch what you said.
Claims about unshakable pillars of Western civilization are not, precisely speaking, psychological or sociological claims in an academic sense. They're not meant to be empirically proven. The message is quite clearly...
See, I don't like that language, like as if an academic sense means empirically provable. It doesn't. Theory is not always empirically provable. That's why it's theory, right? Improving a thing is a practical matter.
Civil religious...
Sorry. Proving a thing in terms of... proving a thing empirically is a practical matter.
Because it's grounded in sacred texts like the Bible and kind of semi-sacred texts like the Declaration of Independence, and in the divine. It applies directly to current politics. It formulates very strong ethical norms.
I'm so sorry. I have to watch this from a little bit farther back, just from the end of this quote, because we need to get this down. Sorry, I was distracted by the chat. That's my bad.
Is civil religion.
Okay,
the genre of political leadership in the world.
Here we go.
Now, the main point that I want to make is that the genre of this very message is civil religion.
No. Civil religion is not a genre of text or argumentation. Civil religion refers to the situating of the ultimate concern, because there is something to that definition of religion, by the way, which is impoverished, but it still puts its finger on something. This idea of ultimate concern. It's the situating of ultimate concern in the state. So Japan, during the Meiji Restoration, actually, if I'm remembering this correctly, that's when we see the invention of Shinto as a civil religion. Because originally, Shinto wasn't a thing. There were little tribal shrines and things like that, and there were like commonalities and practices between them. Like you could go to a shrine at the other end of the island, and you could sort of understand what they were doing, even if you came from somewhere very far away. But these weren't construed as being a part of a single body of things. That became the case as a result of deliberate political planning. Because they needed to make it, because they were trying to compete with Western colonial powers, they needed to make it so that the Japanese people, which had just been formed recently as the Japanese people, because it was something very different prior to this, that the Japanese people were invested in the new Japanese state in the same way as, well, that they were invested in, that they invested the highest, that they had all of the elements of the ideal modern European state form, right? That is a civil religion. Shinto is a perfect example, at least, of an attempt at a civil religion. A civil religion does not refer to just talking in vaguely religious terms, as if that means anything. Religious terms, when you're describing something that's tangentially related to politics.
Notions like divine center of
civic or national religion. National religion is a meaningless concept. Civil religion refers to, again, the and we have to be careful because, like, well, insofar as it means something, it's taking whatever it is that's peculiar to religion and making it of the civic body. National religion is just restating the same thing, unless you're reducing it to a frankly meaningless description of ideas. And granted, we're talking about these without their substance. This is why Durkheim had to fall back on a totemic principle to describe religion, because you can't know exactly what the actual ideas people hold of the thing that they're organized around, right? Yeah, so if we're talking about national religion in the context of the nation state, as opposed to civil religion, then we're just making a blanket assumption about what people think, which is always going to be wrong. If we're talking about civic religion, it's a top-down element to this. We are talking about the attempt to place the highest priority for the highest concern of every citizen in state institutions, so that you can conceive of magistrates as equivalent to priests, so that you can conceive of soldiers dying in battle as being martyrs for a divine cause, or something like that. Like Bioshock Infinite has the one thing Bioshock Infinite got right is, well, I don't know if they got it right, but the way in which Bioshock Infinite, the city of Columbia in the sky, construes the founding fathers, that is of a civic religion, 100%. So the Constitution is an attempt at civil religion? No, it's not.
Logos and claims about unshakable pillars of Western civilization are not, precisely speaking, psychological or sociological claims in an academic sense. They're not meant to be empirically proven. The message is quite clearly civil religious.
But they're meant to be received as empirically proved, which is why Peterson is extraordinarily dishonest.
Because it's grounded in sacred texts like the Bible and kind of semi-sacred texts like the Declaration of Independence, and in the divine. It applies directly to current politics. It formulates very strong ethical norms in the form of, I think, what needs to be called dogmas, that is, to use his words again, self-evident bedrock axioms and unshakable pillars. Importantly, again, in my understanding, this is also not philosophy, because, again, in my understanding, philosophy questions religion and questions civil religion, analyzes and presents theories, but it doesn't really aim at, as I see it, in formulating self-evident normative bedrock axioms or claiming that there are some unshakable pillars.
I'm gonna let him run for a bit longer after this break, but I do need to comment on this. I dislike this characterization of philosophy, and here's why. Let's take the dialogues of Plato. What are the dialogues of Plato? Well, obviously they're dialogues, right? What's a dialogue? Well, I'll tell you what a dialogue is not. A dialogue is not a clear statement or a clear treatise interrogating and answering questions. It's not inherently critical. Because sometimes we can only arrive, actually a lot of the time, maybe even the majority of times, we can only arrive at the ability to be critical of a thing through accident or through being guided unconsciously through like steps of consideration that we would have not happened upon simply by using our critical faculties on a thing, right? Philosophy, as distinct from sophistry, is the love of truth. It is not a methodology, it is an orientation. Sophists are perfectly capable of being entirely logical thinkers, but if they don't love truth, then they are not philosophers. That is the difference. And people get this wrong all the time. A sophist is a fake philosopher, not in the sense that they do their philosophical work badly, but that at the end of the day, their ultimate priority is not truth. It is what they get from the process of pretending to care about it primarily. And that's why they're untrustworthy. It's not because they're bad. A sophist can be a better scholar than a philosopher. But the philosopher will go to the bitter end for the sake of truth, and the sophist will get off the ladder when it suits him or her. That's the difference.
And as civil religion, Peterson's approach, I think, very clearly resembles wokeness, because wokeness, too, speaks in the form of self-evident bedrock axioms and unshakable pillars.
Why is he accepting this terminology? Wokeness isn't a thing. It's also so dated. Nobody's talked about woke in forever. It was like a BLM thing back in the day. And it had nothing to do with like all these other things. It had to do with like it was specifically being like aware, primarily as a black person, that the state was oppressing you and opposed to you, which it is in the majority of cases. In subtle ways for some and not so subtle ways for others. It had nothing to do with like just leftism in general. And nobody talks about it anymore, except for like these weirdos who are grifting in like the softball, slightly right of the middle of the road right wing, you know. Fox News followers who just got an itch for something a little more heady than Sean Hannity.
And in this way, people like John McWhorter, for instance...
wokeness is all the rage now. Among righties, people on the left don't talk about wokeness. Never. Plato shilled the noble lie. No, Plato didn't shill the noble lie. Plato shilled the great myth. The great myth. It wasn't a lie. It was actually the truth. That's the point. Plato wrote dialogues. He understood that you don't necessarily arrive at the truth by being told it. You have to be made to be able to receive it. It's also, by the way, like the Republic wasn't strictly speaking a political treatise. It also was a political treatise. Except it wasn't. It was a dialogue concerned with politics, but it was primarily, like, remember, everybody forgets this. Why is Plato talking about the city? He's not talking about the city for the sake of the city. He's expanded the human mind into the city as an analogy because he wants to find what justice is and whether it's better than injustice. People on the left do talk about wokeness. Yeah, in response to people on the right talking about wokeness. Wokeness has no content on the left, though. Right? Like, wokeness is an orientation of skepticism and criticism. Like, it's in the word. Like, you're aware, you're awake, right? You're aware of the ways in which you are oppressed, in which the narratives of fairness and whatnot are not true. Like, stuff like that. But, like, it's not talked about as if it's like, this is an ideology with a canon. Like, you'll never see someone on the left talking about wokeness like James Lindsay does, where it's like, it's a hermetic religion. Like, these people are nutballs. They aren't nutballs. What they are is absolutely soulless grifters. But basically Scientologists. Sunday, have you played The Forgotten City? I have The Forgotten City. That's that walking simulator. Right? I should play it. But, yeah. Anyways, we'll keep going.
Have rightly characterized wokeness also as, in essence, a civil religious cult.
No.
So, in this sense, Peterson's approach represents a religious, liberal, conservative wing of North American civil religion, as opposed to the progressive wing, that is wokeness.
Okay, he had me until, like, the religion terminology. Let's leave aside the civil part for a second. I've criticized that. It's not a civil religion. Is it a religion? What is religion? Here's a quick genealogy. Earliest use of religion in Rome. Religio. An intensity about a moment. There is a gravity when you shake a hand and you swear an oath. When you enter into a courtroom, there's a religio about it. You're in the woods, you suddenly think something's watching you. You're serious. There's a religio about the situation. Stuff like that. Rome goes into a situation of extreme strife. People panic. People start turning to different cultic religions. They start turning to divination. They start sacrificing animals, children, yada yada yada, to save themselves from disaster. People like Cicero come out and say, "Look, Gaius, there's good religio, like there's a good kind of being like afraid of things and being worried about things, being worried about the gods and whatnot. On divination goes into this, but there's also a bad kind. There's superstitio. It's going a little bit crazy about this kind of thing. So now religion has gone from a human faculty, if you will, a kind of a sense of seriousness or gravity about a thing that can like have normatively, morally neutral or whatever, like a scalar distinctions, like you have more or less religio, and like having not sufficient religio for a given context can be bad, or having too much can be bad, or having just the right amount can be good. Like if you're too afraid of offending someone, you have too much religio, you can be like destructive socially that way. Or if you have too little, you're a sociopath, you don't care about other people or society, you can be destructive that way, but just the right amount that's good. It changes to a binary, not a scale, but a binary. Now there's the right religio, you're praying to the right gods, you're going just far enough, not too far, not far enough, but just there. You're obeying the laws, you're paying your debts, you care about the rules and social norms, things like that. Not too much, but not too little. That's religio. Scalar order gone. And then if you do any of these things in excess, especially consistently over time, that's superstitio. Then Rome becomes Christian. Now we're talking about the religio of the Christians, true religion, and the religio of the pagans, superstitio. That's their perspective. That's just an articulation of that. Christianity dominates. Okay, well now we have like Christians in different parts of the world, or different parts of the empire rather. They practice in different ways. There's the religio of the monks here, there's the religio of the monks here, the religio of the monks in Britain, the religio of the monks in I don't know, wherever the other part of the Roman Empire was, in Atlantis, whatever. And then Christendom, after the fall of the Roman Empire, encounters Islam. The religiones of the Christians, and the religiones of the heretical Mohammedans, because they conceived of Islam as a Christian splinter sect, right? That's just to give like their position on it. I'm not like saying that myself. And then finally, we abstract entirely. We become skeptical of Christianity, and of course also skeptical of Islam. Not Muslims, of course, but like we do, whoever that is. And now we are left the term without any like solid anchoring content. We look at the world. Okay, there's all these different cultures around the world. They're popping up. They're becoming technologically advanced, equivalent to Europe, equivalent to America. How do we understand them? Well, what are the parts of a society? Well, let's look at our own. We've got a state, we've got a religion, we've got courts, yada yada yada. Let's find those in other places. Now, a religion just means that part of a place that isn't the state, and isn't the courts, and isn't like a whole host of other things, like the floating, like the spirit of the thing, if you will. But also we're thinking of it purely in Christian terms. So we're looking for dogmas, we're looking for sacred texts. For God's sake, you go into Wikipedia, you can find sacred texts, as if that's a meaningful category. As if like the writings of Buddha or something like that were just like, this is the Bible for Buddhists. It's like, no, that's not how that works. It's a term without content. It came from a specific time and place in which it meant something very particular that had a concrete relationship to the world, to political reality. By political reality, I mean a frickin' actual thing that existed in the world, a community oriented around a physical object. It was your relationship of intensity of feeling, of gravity towards a thing. And if you have no religio towards your state, you do not care if it lives or dies, you are a bad citizen. If you have enough, you are a good citizen. If you have too much, you are a cowardly or a paranoid citizen. And this has a concrete meaning. And every other use is literally just saying, how can we construe other cultures in Christian terms?
And, interestingly enough, they are both based on a strong individualistic claim of authentic identity. This brings us to the second point, namely anger, or I would even call it methodological anger. And let's look at another clip.
And if any one of
Methodological anger. Oh, I'm so sorry. Maybe I'm just extremely drunk right now, which I am, but that just cracked me up. Methodological anger. Oh God. This guy. Let's keep going.
one of us is not treated in this manner. If anyone, no matter how powerful, reacts to any of us, no matter how downtrodden, as if our free will is illusory or our role in choosing the outcomes of our lives non-existent, then we get offended and angry and agitated and insulted, and rightly so.
In this clip, Peterson very explicitly embraces and emphasizes anger. Anger is an important rhetorical and emotional tool in religion and in civil religion as well.
Oh, for God's sake. Okay, I hate... Oh God, this pisses me off so badly. You might have, heard a lot of, anti-SJWs, and I was one of them at the time, talk about, feminism as a methodology, as if that's something inherently silly. It's like, well, feminism is a specific point of view. How can that be a methodology? Methodologies are supposed to be objective. No. A methodology is something that informs how you go about performing a thing, right? Feminism as a methodology lays bare the fact that there is a particular critique of patriarchal assumptions implicit in the thing you are doing. And you can agree with that or disagree with that, it doesn't matter. But the point is, that's not elevating feminism. That's laying bare what you are doing. That's actually being honest. Methodological statism, for example, this is something that I have an issue with, is the assumption that again, because assumptions feed into your methodology. This is like an unstated axiom. that the relevant object of a study, or of your research, or of observation, or whatever it is you're doing, the relevant object of your activity is the state. Or of politics is the state. And this leads into a bunch of problems, because if you have a methodological nationalism and you try to talk about a pre-state condition, then you're going to be misconstruing that condition as having qualities that rely upon the existence of states, which don't exist. Same with methodological nationalism. Like there's a... where are we? Where are you? Where are you? Terrible, terrible, terrible book. Is it not here? Did I put it somewhere else? Weird. I thought I had it on this. Oh, here it is. Imagine Communities. Terrible book. Everybody loves it for some reason, but terrible, terrible book. It assumes the existence of the nation as a thing to be explained, as in, to be clear, not like elucidating what the nation means ontically, as in like breaking down whether or not, first of all, the nation as a thing is even a single thing that should be described in that way and should be assumed. But it takes common use of the term, which treats it as if it's something that should be assumed, assumes that itself, and then tries to find a way to coherently justify the expression. That is methodological nationalism. The assumption that the nation is a thing, that it exists, informs books like this, and infects all of their prescriptions, or all of their descriptions, or everything that they do. This one's bad too, by the way. I don't like dislike Hobsbawm, but like same issue. That's what it means to talk about a methodology. The fact that you happen to do something in addition isn't methodological. Like, if somebody like farts frequently in the laboratory, is that a part of their methodology? No, but they may do it every single time they're doing a test. It's immaterial. That's not a part of their methodology. Peterson may be angry. He may use language that evokes anger, but that doesn't make it methodological. This is such a spurious comment.
Peterson not only employs it frequently by speaking in an angry, at least somewhat angry manner, but he also justifies it explicitly here. This little clip that we just showed follows directly his claims about the sovereign individual and...
Which Hobsbawm book did I just hold up? That was Nations and Nationalism. Which is... I actually don't like that book. It's not bad per se, but it's scattered. However, it does have a lot of useful historical information. Like, I would read it that way. President Sunday, you suffer from some form of word essentialism, too worried about the right definition of any of these terms instead of looking at the meat and potatoes of the argument. Arguments are made of words, man. Or, madam, I don't know what you are. Like, statistically likely to be a male, but whatever. Because apparently my audience is entirely male for some reason. I can't fathom why. I'm not worried about the right definition of these terms. The problem is if the definitions that we're using bear extra content that infects our conclusions, that's a problem. That's a serious problem. President Sunday, considering your interest in genealogy of concepts, what do you think of the type of concept analysis like trying to define religion in terms of necessary and sufficient conditions? I love that to a point, because that construal of that intensity of feeling being a particular thing is culturally specific. And what is culturally specific has specific conditions. We have to isolate that thing. And that thing will have been isolated by someone in history because of reasons. And that describes everything. Anyways, sorry, we'll keep going.
The divine center of Logos. And the point is that if these claims are not accepted, and that's his claim again, if we are not treated in this way, then we are righteously angry about it. So this obviously means that if these claims are challenged, then an emotional reaction
Oh, he's got the 3-body problem on his shelf. Look at that on the upper left. Cool.
is in order.
there's
Because
okay.
given the non-negotiability of these supposedly most real ideas, any challenge to them becomes, at least to an extent, also an attack on our innermost selves, on the foundation of our society. Anger, especially in the Judeo-Christian tradition, has very often been a religious gesture, right? If certain foundational religious beliefs are challenged, then
See, what does he mean by this? Like, he needs to clarify his terms. Like, when he says it's a religious gesture, what does that mean? Because if he just means it has a religiousness about it, if the term is just referencing itself, and just like a vague cluster of things that he thinks that everybody associates with it, and which we do, to be fair, then it doesn't bear any particular content, so he's not saying anything particular, which really he may as well not be saying anything at all. President Sunday, and this is from a right-wing perspective, I think a lot of us religious people are excited about this seemingly spiritualization of leftism during BLM protests as a sign or be a sign of secularism coming to an end. Think about how much you're packing into these terms, though, secularism and spiritualism, right? Like, careful there. That needs to mean something very concrete and very specific, or you don't know what you're saying. You may have a lot of emotional feeling about this, and you may have vague associations between them. Like, for example, you may say it's a sign of secularism coming to an end, and you may think of secularism as like, well, this is a society in which my ideas don't actually bear on how I'm treated, yada, yada, yada. And spiritualization, well, it's something sort of vague and airy-fairy, and it doesn't actually refer to something concrete in law or something like that. It has to do with ideas and feelings and emotions and attitudes. But you gotta pin it down. You've got to pin it down, or else you don't know what you're saying. And it can be done. And you know what? You can even just like reduce things to analytic categories. Like, for the sake of argument, I'm classifying this as this and that as that. And as long as you're upfront about what you're doing, that is perfectly valid. But you got to be upfront about what you're doing. You got to be telling us exactly what stilts you're standing on to make this case. And like, it's not to say that the case can only be held up by stilts, but that in the meantime, you haven't found something more solid to ground it on, and so you are placing it on stilts temporarily to sustain the argument further than what you can actually go, than where you can actually go justifiably, or with full justification, or with objective justification, if you will. Isn't he saying that that anger is a performance of one's religiosity? Sure, but what does that mean? It has to mean something. I can't stress this enough. Like, we come into this with the assumption that these terms just have a definite meaning because we use the terms colloquially. But that's no guarantee that this actually has like a concrete and specific content. In fact, that's exactly when you should be most skeptical of it. Because that thing that you assume is so certain, that is the surest sign that it is the one thing that is not being interrogated fully.
anger is a proper reaction. And in this way, the God in the Judeo-Christian tradition is, from time to time, a quite angry God, and his representatives on earth are thereby also entitled, from time to time, to be very angry.
I mean, not again, at the risk of being essentialist myself, not scripturally, right? Like, vengeance is the Lord's for a reason.
In addition to this rhetorical emphasis on anger and this methodological use of anger, Peterson
See, that's better. Methodological use of anger. That's good.
uses another rhetorical device that is civil religious in nature.
Oh, stop that.
He speaks increasingly, I think, in his recent videos and publications, in the form of a general we. This is exactly the same way in which also the
The old S. We hold thief truths to be filth evident. I'm sorry, I'm being
United States Declaration of Independence speaks, and other civil religious texts that are similar to that. So thereby he claims and establishes
So it's like a lisp. In the course of human events. I'm sorry, I
this
shouldn't talk about
almost mythological we. And intentionally or not, he also establishes, of course, thereby a distinction between us.
Okay, this is actually good. So Zoshalik says, BLM, I disagree with you, by the way, but I'll get into why. BLM has a religio, for instance, but it's not a religion. It's an expression towards systematic injustice within the state or states towards the most oppressed minorities. Okay, no, I agree with this. Sorry. So BLM does have... No, BLM doesn't have a religio. People can have religio in this old sense towards BLM, right? That's how that works. Because again, we're talking about civil religion. We are attaching religious feeling to the laws and to the state form itself. That's what makes it a civil religion. If we're just talking about like feelings and ideas held by people in a territory who happen to be citizens or subjects of whatever rules in that place, well, just think about how arbitrary that is. Why are we specifying, for example, their attitudes towards things called gods in English or German or whatever, and not like cooking practices, not like hand washing, not like, or whether or not they hand wash, not like clothing choices? Like, why are we specifying? Why are we partitioning the things we're trying to describe on purely liberal grounds of the outside material world and the ideas that you hold on the inside, which can't be infected by those things on the outside, or can't be, like, determined by? So you can have a religio towards religion? Yes. Yes, you can.
And them, between the civilized and unspoken but implied, the non-civilized, between those who share the beliefs and, so to speak, the heathens who don't. By the way, Jacques Derrida wrote a great essay about particularly this issue, who is the we in the Declaration of Independence, and we put a link to this essay in the description. So now let's get to the next point, a very important point, self-help. And let's look at another clip.
It's a lot of emotional weight. I mean, I had somebody called me this week. And he just got my number sort of randomly, and he said, "Who is this?" I answered the phone. He said, "Who is this?" I said, "No, who is this?" Since he was calling me, and he said, he told me his name. He said, "Are you Dr. Peterson?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Really?" And I said, "Yes, really." And he just burst into tears, and he just sobbed for 5 minutes uncontrollably, apologizing. And then he said his grandmother had died, and his mother, and...
See, these are real tears. I gotta say, I actually do like Jordan Peterson. I think he's a real person. I think he's a real person the same way Haas is. He talks out of his ass a lot. He thinks way too much of how he thinks, but I do think he's real. And so I do actually feel bad, when I'm criticizing him like this. Because it's just such a damn shame. There's no reason for this. There's no reason for him to be this careless. And I think he actually does care. I think he's drunk. I think so many of these people are just fucking drunk. And I should know. I'm saying this while drunk. But, you have all these little, forces outside of your, you're getting rewarded by a bunch of little things that you can't even account for the ways in which they're warping how you feel about certain things, or about what you feel what you actually tell yourself in your head. I need to take this thing seriously and spend time understanding it. Like, I think, like, this is an actual expression of real emotion. I think he actually does care. I don't think he understands what informs what he cares about. And that's where it gets dangerous. Like, these aren't crocodile tears.
And that he had become suicidal, and that my lectures, he'd watched a lot of them, and that.
Keeping in mind, like, he looks like this, he is this rough, because he got addicted to benzos that were prescribed to him while his wife was dying of cancer. I can't actually fathom how to deal with that. If Peterson is not a con, then he's a lunatic. Maybe to an extent. There is probably an argument for that. But, like, I don't know. I'm not defending Peterson here. Like, he's terrible theoretically, and he does to other scholars who were much better, orders of magnitude better, at what he pretends to be doing. Like, he disses them. He besmirches their character. Like, he does terrible things, but doesn't mean I have to, right? So
that it helped him, guide him through that. And well, I've seen a lot of that.
That
thing is, he's performing for an audience. I think in a way he's definitely performing for an audience, but I think, like, the tears, I don't think help him. Like, the tears are things that are memed about him. They make him into a joke, like Glenn Beck's tears. I think he's drunk and delusory. And I think some kinds of things can crack through the filter and some kinds can't. And a person who is well disposed to him, who is going through a really rough time, and to whom he has a relationship of as a kind of emotional anchor, that cracks through. Not a lot of the other people that he directly or indirectly hurts, but that cracks through, and I think that's legitimate.
That just happens over and over. Like, it happens, I would say, 4 or 5 times a day in restaurants or in airports. Or, well, you've been experiencing that to some degree in Australia, you said. And it's so good. And the mainstream media that's been covering what I've been doing, they just miss this completely, because it seems like everything that constitutes news in our society has to be political and group-oriented.
In this clip, Peterson rightly complains that his critics and the media tend to ignore the immense effect he has.
This is a man being moved by his own importance? Yeah, sure, absolutely. No argument for me. I'm just saying I think he's legitimately being moved. I don't think, like, he's faking the tears, right? Like, Peterson's full of shit. I'm 100% in agreement with you. I'm making a very modest point here.
Has, I think, what can be justly called a public healer. He is a civil religious healer with a massive effect.
Oh, stop that.
And he even participates, as we can see very clearly in this clip, in the suffering of the people he tries to heal. And he is not hesitant to display this suffering. It's a very important part of his public presentation. So he does display his healing capacities. He frequently tells stories like the one he just told in that clip. And of course, he thereby also displays himself as someone who is available for healing others. And this is also how he is, through his books, commercially advertised.
This is a terrible construal. So Peterson is a healer in this civil... Like, no. No. Like, think of the implications here, like, what he's sort of drawing on. He's drawing on the idea of, like, a primitive society in which there is a shaman who just sort of, he doesn't really realize he's bullshitting, but he's like the healer. He's like, shakes a rattle over a person. Oh, they got better. I'm going to shake a rattle over other people. Maybe it makes them feel better, because better. Like, like, it's Whiggish. It's like, it's the idea that Peterson is just an instantiation of a primitive tendency. This is why I dislike comparative philosophy and comparative politics, because it relies upon this approach, and it's highly uncritical. It seems critical because it has highfalutin words like comparative in it, but it's not. You're not actually comparing the philosophies of different cultures. You're comparing philosophy to constructions that are made by contorting them artificially to look like philosophy from other cultures. And you're basically just recreating philosophy with like arbitrary configurations, arbitrary like aesthetic differences, and just setting them side by side. And you think you're like understanding the world and understanding other places and other beliefs, but really you're just recreating your own. Like it is a mirror, right? That's you reading into Muller's argument. He didn't do anything that lays bare what you just asserted. I disagree, and I think I just said how I think so, but if you want to elaborate, please do. People have a neurodisposition to crying sometimes. It happens in ADHD, and when people do things like Xanax and get drunk and start talking about themselves. Well, hey, I mean, he was on benzos, so maybe, but you know, I'm just making a point about the sincerity of it. I'm not saying that there wasn't an ignoble cause to it.
In this way, I think Peterson functions like a mega church or a super mega church on the internet. He undoubtedly has massive healing effects, just as religious communities have healing effects, like whatever people who suffer from.
Look, you're saying I'm just reading into him stuff that he didn't say, but he's literally doing what I just described right now. He's saying, look, guys, mega churches have healing effects. They don't all have healing effects. They just don't. This is again like he's essentializing a caricature. It's a stereotype.
Alcoholism or people who have gone through very tragic events.
Your interpretation of his use of healer is all you. He literally just assigned it a specific place in a concrete thing. I don't know what to tell you.
Often find healing in a religious community. But at the same time, these often massive healing effects come with the spread of a specific message, or I would say a specific civil religious dogma. And additionally, this happens, like in the case of the mega churches in the United States, in the context of a for-profit commodification. I'm not morally judging this, I'm just pointing out the mere fact. So wokeism too does a lot of good. For instance, it fights against racism and promotes social justice. But at the same time, it is also commodified and politically appropriated, right? There is this whole sector of woke advertising, and corporations apply woke gestures to sell their products. And even, as we discussed in another video, the CIA embraces wokeism, and of course major political parties in the West do the same thing. This shows the ambiguity of self-help. From a Marxist perspective on religion, including civil religion, it could be said that religion supports the individualist, capitalist ideology that produces mass individual suffering, but then it enables religious mass healers to sell efficient cures for the diseases that, at least in part, it produced in the first place. This could be said from a Marxist perspective. From a Nietzschean perspective, a perspective that Peterson sometimes claims to adopt himself, it can be said that Christian religion has always been by and for the sick. It's maintaining and healing sickness at the same time. So, from this perspective, from a Nietzschean perspective, religion is not really for the healthy. It is based on the cultivation of sickness. So the question can be asked, is that also the case for civil religion?
I don't know if he's talking about the cultivation of sickness, but there is something to that in terms of like the idea that like the church or whatever functions as a kind of cure, or like an anesthetic, like an opiate. Like that's the literal term, religion is the opiate of the masses. He doesn't say it's like the like we have terminology if he simply meant it was just a lie to keep people in check, right? What he means is like this makes the misery of the life of the exploited laborer bearable. Which is essentially identical to the statement of Nietzsche, like he who has a why can survive anyhow. Or something like that. Characterizing Peterson as a pure grifter is too simplistic. I agree with that. That's the scary thing. Peterson isn't just a pure grifter. It would be easier if he was. Like someone like Charlie Kirk or Ben Shapiro, that's a pure grifter, 100%. That is a person whose career is bullshit. Peterson's is also, but there's a lack of self-awareness there. He's being driven by stuff outside of himself. Not all of it. He lies too. He bullshits too, 100%. Opiate treats symptoms, not causes. Yeah, exactly. It makes suffering bearable. It makes you not feel the sting of injuries that you really have.
From my own personal perspective, I would more highlight a third point. R. Peterson and
Dave Rubin,
wokeism,
good example of a pure grifter.
while performing very...
Although I wonder if he has like the brain capacity to actually grift. I think he's kind of a... I think if there's any example of a P zombie on the right, it's going to be David Rubin.
real healing effects, maybe also simultaneously spreading a certain ideology, identity politics in the case of wokeism, a certain
Wokeism.
almost fundamentalist individualism on the other hand, that creates social divisions by over-insisting on a supposed common we of the righteous and the civilized that excludes somehow everyone who does not submit themselves to this we. So aren't we dealing both in Peterson's case as well as in the case of wokeism with some form of moralist dogmatism that, while having strong healing effects, is also highly divisive? So if we look at Jordan Peterson as, in essence, a civil religious figure, then the question can be asked, is he a modern day prophet? And precisely this question was asked in the following clip.
Just getting back onto this issue of you sort of almost being a prophet in a way, do you view yourself as that? I mean, as religion declines, you go on this world tour, millions of people read your books, billions of people probably watching the videos online. Do you see yourself as a sort of new religious phenomenon for people?
Not new. Not new. And
Oh, God.
I see myself as fortunate. That's how I see myself, that I have the opportunity to do this.
Here, Peterson
Oh, no.
first accepts the description of himself as a civil religious prophet,
Oh, that's
but
cringe.
he just says he's not new. So is he stepping in the footsteps of the ancient prophets?
Isaiah? Like, what
But-
what is this?
Soon after, he actually also rejects the same description. Let's look at this.
But are you a prophet?
And,
Why are you taking time?
see, to say yes or no, I have to think about how I might be conceptualized, how what I'm doing might be conceptualized. No, I think I see myself as a psychologist, and fundamentally, I am a psychologist. I'm a behavioral psychologist.
So the rejection is quite hesitant, and interestingly enough, only, as he says, in consideration of how such a label, prophet, would alter his public perception. Maybe we can say he is a reluctant prophet, as many prophets were. And again, not so different from the prophets of civil religion, such as, just to name one, very famous one, Greta Thunberg.
Oh no, Greta
She
Thunberg.
too is also something like an angry prophet.
No, Greta Thunberg is not a prophet. Oh my god. Oh man. Oh, this is so bad. Ugh. Like, is every spokesman a prophet now? Like, I don't know, if George Clooney does like a public service announcement, is he a like, what is this?
Now let's get to the point of the Baudrillard-esque spectacle. First of all, it's a little bit unfortunate. The term should either be Debordian spectacle or maybe Baudrillard-esque simulacrum, because the term spectacle actually comes from Guy Debord, and Baudrillard is more famous for the notions of simulacrum or hyperreality for that matter. And yes, I would say both concepts, the notion of the spectacle as well as the notion of the simulacrum or the hyperreal, apply to Peterson, but by no means to him alone or specifically to him. These concepts apply basically to all of contemporary society. That's the point of these concepts. And of course, especially to anything and everything that's happening in the mass or now in the social media.
President Sunday, how many subs until you change your name to Prophet Sunday? Never. It is the chroniclers who will come after I'm gone who will determine whether I'm a prophet or not.
Including this channel and this very video now. So notions like a spectacle or simulacrum or hyperreal describe and critique contemporary society better, I think, than Peterson's concepts derived from the Bible and attached to it the popular, more secular semantics of liberalism, individualism, and what has been called the age of authenticity. The core idea of these concepts, spectacle, simulacrum, the hyperreal, is that reality does not really precede, but is formed in and through its symbolic mass representation. And that idea can be illustrated much more concretely, as I like to do, with the notion of the brand in the economy, right? Just again, think about something like a Nike shoe. It's not that the actual shoes give identity to the Nike brand, but it's the Nike brand which gives identity to the shoes. And in this sense, Nike too is, to use Peterson's language, a most real idea. And it's exactly this most real idea that you pay for when you buy the shoe. In the same way, I claim Peterson's most real idea of sovereign individuality is, in Baudrillard's language, better described as a most hyper-real idea. It's a civil religious brand.
Oh no.
What Jordan Peterson presents us is the civil religious aspect of the brand of sovereign individuality.
Oh God, this
And
is so
we
bad.
see its completely secular forms when, again, we just look at Nike advertising. Make yourself proud. Make yourself strong. Make yourself fit. These could all be Peterson slogans, and they are actually most hyper-real Nike slogans as well. Their message is very parallel. Today, people in the economy and advertising
No, that's not what that
and
means.
in politics know that they become what they are and that they create their value by creating a profile.
No. It's not the existence of a demonstration that valorizes your use of a product is not hyper real. Oh, God. Oh, man.
That is the same today in religion and in civil religion. Civil religion, too, follows this most real model that we see in advertising and in politics. And we see it not only with Jordan Peterson, we see it equally in...
No, hyper-real is like there's a great example, actually, in international relations, where we conceive of the world as being made up of, like, these things called nation-states. We assign qualities to this, and then we derive what we think are laws from the necessary relations between these abstractions, and then that thing that doesn't really exist in the world, that governs our actual action. Like, that's what hyperreal means. It doesn't mean, like, the bare fact of representing wearing a shoe with the thing like, this shoe will make you stronger. That's not what that means.
Wokeism, Peterson, and Nike all spread what could be called the gospel or the brand of authenticity. And they do so under conditions of prophylicity.
God, man, no.
So finally, let's get to Peterson's question. Is all we offer to the world something akin to an approval-seeking set of false selves with nothing genuine at the bottom? I ask you in all seriousness, is that a philosophy or is it a confession? Let me try to amend this statement a little bit.
It's a question,
First of
it's not
all,
a statement.
The basic idea of prophylicity, following thinkers like Debord and Baudrillard, is that identity in
True
our
crossroads. Only
times
President Sunday is the ultimate
is
authority on
often,
the meaning of words.
but not
Everyone
exclusively,
else is using words
achieved
wrong.
by
Finally, something we
curating
agree on.
and projecting a certain brand or a profile that is then validated by a general peer. Now, two things have to be considered here. Number one, this applies to our time. Very different from Peterson's notion. What is at stake here is not a trans-historical divine logos that is in everyone. This describes a mode of producing identity, of having an identity in the present. And secondly, it's not exclusive. It's not the...
Okay, I actually had a short clip on like the importance of using words in a specific, in a coherent way, in a way that is coherent with the rest of what you are saying. And if you are using things in like to the extent possible, the use of your terms has to be made explicit, especially when we're talking about like big abstractions like religion and things like that. The danger here is that these terms have a history with each other and they bear on each other. What is religion bears on what is politics. Like, these concepts border on each other, right? They are distinct by reference to each other, from each other. If you are using one of these things in a way that impinges on the meaning of the other term, then you are contradicting yourself, and you're going to introduce confusions into your thinking as a result. And if you aren't able to pinpoint exactly where those impingements are taking place, then you're going to like generate theory that has no basis in reality, because it can't, because it's contradictory. It's absolutely true that Nike creates a hysterstition which has status because it is perceived to have status. Okay, yeah. In terms of Nike signifying status, yes, you're right. But I don't think that's really what he was talking about here.
The only identity technology that is available. So it's not all that we are. Still, I maintain that this identity technology of prophylicity is very important, and especially so with regard to people like Jordan Peterson, who are very much in the focus of the media, and increasingly so through this very activity myself. It's a central part of basically everyone's identity building today. Such profile-based selves are only false, as Peterson claims, from the perspective of an authenticity paradigm, which I do not share. I do not see them as inherently false. People can achieve identity by being truly invested in their profiles, and I claim this is also the case, for instance, for Jordan Peterson. And it is shown in his publicly displayed emotionality that we saw earlier. It is very clear that there is a true personal investment, in this case, in a public profile, which emerges through social validation feedback loops with a massive general peer. The same is true also for more woke influencers, like, for instance, Abigail Thorne, who we discussed in another video. I equally trust that she is truly invested in her profile, and do not think that she is simply false. Interestingly enough, both Peterson and wokeism, in different ways, insist, nevertheless, on the modern Western gospel of individual authenticity. But both do so under the increasingly obvious conditions of profilicity within which they operate. And yet, everyone, including Jordan Peterson, myself, is genuine, not false, but genuinely pretending. Our genuine identity is produced in and through our performance. It is not, as he says at the bottom. I think we should simply be truthful enough, to use again Peterson's language, or critical enough, to use my language, not to cover this up and to admit it to ourselves and to others. Finally, for the sake of sanity, for the sake of minimizing anger, for the sake of promoting social and psychological ease, it may be helpful to minimize one's obsession with one's identity, be it an authentic identity or a profile-based identity. So yes, put in the way I just formulated it, this view is both a philosophy and a confession. And, like in Peterson's case, it even has a therapeutic intention. Let's not be too much invested in our identity, be it in the form of a profile or of sovereign individuality. Now let me conclude with a footnote on Nietzsche.
Oh,
yes,
no.
I do believe that Peterson's take on Nietzsche is somewhat inaccurate, and I don't think it reflects the breadth of Nietzsche's ideas very well. I personally prefer PewDiePie's take on Nietzsche.
A crummy commercial. Okay, I have to take a call, so I'm going to pause it here for now. I might come back and I'll give some final thoughts. Crossroads, I'm sorry, but Socialix, can't even speak, is actually being quite coherent, so I think that might be a you problem. Alright, I'm going to be right back. I'll play some background sounds, and we'll conclude. All right, I'm back. Okay. Well, that was that. So what do we think about this? Okay. I do want to be clear, like, I've had a lot of critiques for Carefree Wandering here. I have a lot more respect for Carefree Wandering than I do for Peterson right now. Orders of magnitude, in fact. I don't think that's particularly... I think that's really surprising to anybody. But he's doing the same stuff. He's playing fast and loose with these terms. He's running off of cliches for public clout at the end of the day. I think he's justified in being indignant. Peterson's rebuttals to him were incoherent. But, I mean, like, he just on-boards so much, uncritically. The problem with, like... I really dislike this video for a lot of reasons, but the primary one is that his entire analysis just uncritically takes on cliches. Just a bunch of categories he inherits from common discourse that he doesn't interrogate, beyond trying to, like, schematize them. And that's not enough, because that doesn't actually tell us if the elements themselves are appropriate. It simply tries to fit elements that we inherit from God knows where onto our experience, and often onto our experience just of discourse about those elements. So it's like, what are you even saying anymore? Like, there's no content to this idea of civil religion. He never elaborates on this, not here anyways. Maybe he does in the other video. But here he uses it in a way that's entirely incoherent. Like, the civil part has no definite meaning, so I don't know what he's saying when he says that religion is civil. And the religion part has no definite meaning. He uses it entirely in a colloquial sense, which would be fine if he was just talking about, like, stuff that churches do. But he's characterizing stuff that churches don't do as stuff that churches do. So what is he doing? You completely missed Peterson's rebuttals. They were those nonsensical comments he made on the Jordan Peterson, The Mirror of Wokeness video that we looked at briefly. You didn't miss much. I don't know. Like, I don't dislike the guy, but he's way too uncritical. He's way too, he's just not critical. Like, he onboards a lot of stuff that I agree with. He's in my camp, politically. But, as a scholar, I can't put my stamp of approval on virtually any of this. This is just not in his wheelhouse. Here's the thing. I think he does himself a disservice by characterizing himself primarily as a philosophy channel. If his specialization is in the philosophy of a place that doesn't characterize its customs and its intellectual products as philosophy, then he's not a philosopher. He is something perfectly respectable, equally respectable even. He is a curator and commenter upon works by a different tradition than philosophy, or a different practice than philosophy, or a practice above philosophy, and that it incorporates philosophy. Like, you can say the same thing about political science. It incorporates philosophy. It's not philosophy, but it absolutely incorporates it. And it bears on philosophy. It even produces a lot of philosophy. Is produced by philosophy, but it isn't philosophy. And what he was doing here wasn't philosophy. It was super lay anthropology, and it was bad. It was bad. Very bad. Like, he's not totally botched. Like, I agree with the spirit of his response. But I don't know, he just, you know, this is the kind of thing that triggers me the most. It's not people getting stuff wrong. It's people not knowing what they don't know. And the problem with like just using these terms uncritically is that they give you a sense of certainty. These are black boxes in a theory. Like, we need to link this part to this part. I don't know how to do it. Oh, it's okay. I've got this magical term, civil religion. And it just does all the work for me. I don't know what it's doing, but it seems to connect the dots. It's not good. Like, you don't know what you're talking about then, but you think you do. And that's what this terminology does. It gives you the false impression that you have schematized correctly, that you have actually, like, not schematized, but you have analyzed the structure of the thing thoroughly and you understand its function. But if there's a big black box that your eyes can't penetrate, doing like a key part of the work to make this thing into the thing that you think it is, then you don't understand it. It sounded like he was throwing terms around a bit. Yeah, in essence, yeah, that's the issue. Like, it's not that it didn't make sense. If anything, it's that it made too much sense. It made too much sense given that a lot of this is underdetermined and the terms being used aren't specific enough that we should be trying to make coherent systems out of them. These are things to be studied further, not to be incorporated as, like, obvious thing. Like, this is just wokeness is just a thing we need to work with. Like, no. No, the characterization of anything in the world as wokeness is itself highly suspect. Extraordinarily suspect. There's a reason why people like James Lindsay rely on it. But anyways, we've, how long have we been going for? Yeah, 2 hours and 10 minutes. I think we've given this 35-minute video. I think we've given it a fair shake. Again, I don't dislike Carefree Wandering. Somebody suggested earlier that I talk to him. I am pessimistic that he would talk to me. I would be pleasantly surprised if he does, but I don't. And, like, I feel bad about this. Like, I hope I'm wrong, but I get the impression that there's a spirit of cynicism behind a lot of this. And I don't think he would talk to a critic who's small enough that he can ignore. Maybe I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I would like to be surprised. I've been surprised by people before. Like, King Crocoduck surprised me. Like, radically surprised me. Extremely decent person. I disagree with him on almost everything, but massively decent person. St. Andrewism. Fantastic. I disagree with him on less, oddly enough. Had some really nice things to say on a video that was, like, substantially critical of a lot of the stuff that he said. Now, granted, I was a lot, like, more positive about his video on rethinking human history, minus some bits at the end, and his treatment of Rousseau, of course. But, you know, like, there are definitely people who are real in this space. I'm just pessimistic that this is one. And I don't know if that's, like, my own prejudice or my own bias or whatever, but I mean, I'd talk to him. I would love to talk to him. That'd be fun. But nobody talks to me. But I'm not optimistic that he would. But, you know, who knows? Although Gregory Sadler said he'd like to come on again for something. Not for Squid Game, unfortunately, because he hasn't watched it yet. Which hurts my soul, because Squid Game is amazing. But anyways. I think he made this for the algo. I don't begrudge him for making it for the algorithm. I just wish he'd made it better. You know? Like, there was a way to approach this humbly, where it's like, Jordan Peterson, I don't know what you're saying. This doesn't make any sense. Let me count the ways. And that would be fine. Instead, he tried to do, like, this weird armchair anthropology thing. And, like, as someone who, like, tries to do that seriously, it just hurts. This was painful. This was actually painful. But, yeah. You'll talk to me, Aaron? Thank you. That means a lot. Alright, so I think we can wrap it up here. Thanks everybody for watching. I mean, I say this was painful, but this was kind of fun. And take care. Have a good evening, everybody. Ciao.